Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Five Drinks for Midnight, the show where we bring the questions, guests bring the drinks, and we try to wrap up before midnight because we all know filming after midnight, nothing good can happen. Today we're talking to Austin Millspaugh, National Brand Ambassador for Heaven's Door. But before we do, hit that like and subscribe. According to Google, 1/3 of you guys aren't hitting the subscribe button. So let's go ahead, hit that out. It will really help us out. Let's get started. Austin, thanks so much for joining us. Five Drinks for Midnight. 5 drinks, 5 questions. Midnight, whatever comes first. How you doing, sir? How are things?
Good, not too bad. Enjoying Nashville right now. Just came back from Memphis. It's been about 9 states in about 4 months, but it's quite the journey, and I'm just happy people enjoy what we're doing.
Excellent. So I got these lovely samples here. What are we drinking first?
I think we're gonna go with the bourbon first. Mine's
All right.
a little low. That might be my problem. But so what you're into is going to be our bourbon. It is going to be a high rye bourbon. It's about obviously Nashville, so we got to get a little, but it's a high rye bourbon that is not Lincoln County. So a thing to think about with Tennessee whiskey. There was the Lincoln County process created in 1830 by Nearest Green, right? But then May 7th of 2013, that was passed as a law for whiskey production. The biggest thing when you're talking about bourbon specifically is a category of the 5 categories of whiskey. 1964 versus 2013. You kind of think of it as one came before the other. And so you have this beautiful thing where bourbon becomes in limbo. And you can choose to use that process or not to. Because we kind of like to play with our food, even though our mothers told us not to, we wanted to see kind of where it went. Because it's a higher rye, because we didn't play on that process, I feel like we intentionally segregated flavors. We want the large grain and small grain to sit on equal footing. And I think it was very successful, in my opinion. It's not going to carry the texture that you expect from the category of bourbon, but it will in the front end. On the kind of almost about mid note to finish, you start to get your small grain really becoming a co-star, not just like a secondary kind of thing, but they both sit on equal footing. And I think that's if you've read the article, it's the Dorito effect, for lack of a better phrase. It really does moisten the mouth and make you want to drink more. But that's just where I lean in on it.
Excellent. Well, cheers.
Cheers.
Oh, yep.
So one thing I will lean on is we've played with this specific expression multiple times because we really wanted to make our bourbon sit where it should. We started high rye, we went high corn, and we've gone back to high rye bourbon. And we think it sits more politely where we want to tell our story in that kind of realm. Okay. There are high ryes. It's not extremely high. There's much higher rye bourbons out there, but we wanted to give something that kind of debunked preconceived notions. And when you think Tennessee whiskey, we know where we all lean into. We know what the first dram that was drank at the White House, we lean in there, right? It's like almost your go-to. But we wanted to kind of put those individuals and those that might be enthusiasts kind of in the same room, realizing the diversity of the category. A lot of people kind of, I think, lean in on the ABCs of a category and think that that is what it is, and anything else different is incorrect. So I feel like this was our way of kind of debunking that preconceived notion, which I probably said like 4 times just now.
No, but you're absolutely right. Because again, this.
Oh, we also changed the proof. I think you should probably have a 92 proof currently.
Yeah. Yep.
So so not only did we change mash bills 3 times, so we started, changed, and went back to. We also increased the proof by 2 points. We're very much indicative of playing with your food. Our master blender, Ryan Perry, always every now and then, almost randomly, really, will kind of placate the proofing moment. As we all know, cask strength below bottling proof, and kind of teetering back, ebb and flow to figuring out when the story best tells itself. And I feel like at 92, we really hit the nail on the head, especially with the high rye.
Awesome. All right. Well, I mean, this is damn good. So I guess let's get into question one. So question one is a little bit of an origin story, but how'd you get started in the spirits industry?
I feel like part of my story is very similar to most. When I went to college, I'm an inner city Houston kid that now lives in Dallas. But as an inner city kid, I lived near kind of like Rice Village area. Technically, I live in Montrose, but it's much prettier now than what it was. But as a kid, you never really realize like, oh, that's dangerous. No, it's just where you live.
Yeah.
Ended up going to Texas Tech, the smallest town I ever lived in my life. Got my degree in architecture with an English minor. Thought I was going to be an architectural critic. Not the case. Bartended throughout college to kind of pay for school, Pell Grants, scholarships, and so forth. Moved to Dallas. None of my family live in that city. I actually followed my girlfriend, who's now my wife. I thought I was going to intern at an architecture firm called HKS. It was an unpaid internship. It was like, well, I have no family here, so I have to pay bills. A good buddy of mine who did the same thing was like, go bartend for a year, then get your weekend shifts and you get intern on the weekdays. So I did that, but the problem was I got really fortunate and worked at a nerdy beer bar. And we're talking about Abby's, Trappist, Abbey styles, IBUs, EBUs, yeast strands, things that were just at the time beyond my scope of understanding. And then I was given Michael Jackson's Tasting Beer. And I was like, wait, there's books on this? I was like, get out of here. Wait. I was like, I can read this and learn more. I want this. And so unfortunately, as most do, I feel like I fell down the rabbit hole. It wasn't per se a black hole. It was very much the rabbit hole and just kind of went from there. During that, I went from beer to distillation because my biggest thing was I loved telling everyone's story, but I kind of wanted to create something that I gave you that made you happy. And so I was like, oh, cocktails. I was like, I have to learn this. One of my original cocktail mentors in Dallas was a gentleman by the name of Omar Yifun, now owns a bar in Deep Ellum called Shoals. He worked for the 86 Co guys back in the day, and he was the one that kind of inspired me to continue down this path. I ended up doing cocktail competitions, not for the sake of winning, but mainly learning what everyone else is doing because I was kind of green for a very long time. At least I feel I was. And then I got lucky enough to make it to MIB in London in 2018. Carly Caskin, if you're watching, you kicked my ass. It makes me sad. She won. I got very close to chasing her tail in Chicago. And then when I got back, I started as Heaven's Door's second part-time ambassador. And then as the distillery grew, I then became our first regional and then now our first national. So it's kind of a beautiful story to be a part of a team from the beginning, kind of like when you work at a bar and essentially you get to be part of the growth of that bar.
That's amazing. I mean, I've now come to find out that there must be something in architecture and becoming then a whiskey aficionado, because I think I've interviewed like 4 people that now wanted to become architects that now work in the whiskey industry. So I think that there's something in the water there. So
I feel like we romanticized design. We really in on like, how'd you make it? Oh my God, do you taste it? I mean, there's something beautiful about it. I feel like architects are kind of like the poets of structure, and whiskey people are very much the same, especially since American whiskey is such a diverse category.
Yeah. No. Well, I think that's amazing, and that's a fucking good origin story. So I mean,
I like to call it beneficent error. It's like working hard but kind of doing in the right way.
Was your wife mad that you didn't go, like you didn't become an architect, and she's much happier that you now can make cocktails and bring home free booze all the time?
My wife was pissed the day I lied to her and told her I wouldn't be a bartender my whole life.
Uh-oh.
When we moved to Dallas, she realized my love for our industry and goes, "You better not be a bartender forever." I was like, "Oh, no, definitely not." And I knew from day one I was lying. Like I had and die behind a bar. And then if you'd have asked me in my first bar if I would be sitting here doing this, I'd have laughed you out of the bar. 100%.
So on to drink two, question two.
Drink two, question two. So we do our double barrel.
Right.
I definitely did a little Josh method, added some water, finished it off to add it to.
All right.
So one thing I will say, not to be a sales thing, because I really hate doing that, but we don't carry age statements on our bottles. The biggest thing is because age statements kind of created this monster of a beast. Technically, cask strength and single barrels have done the same thing if you really think about it, but we've lost the idea, in my opinion, of what's in the bottle. Do you like it or not? If you like it, enjoy. Now, granted, these are all over 6 years old, but that shouldn't connotate any kind of flavor profile off Apple box.
Yeah.
Anyways, but this one is essentially called a double barrel because it's two different categories of whiskey, Tennessee whiskey and a rye. Delve deeper into the formula. It took about 103 iterations to dial in. So it's three whiskeys, two are redundant, one is that other category. So essentially the same type of Tennessee whiskey, same mash, same barrel, same char. One is high in the rickhouse, one's low in the rickhouse. When we're talking about push and pull, essentially a dissection of a barrel, you got char level, red layer, raw wood, right? All of those either filtering negative conjures, leaving in positive conjures, adding color, adding flavor, and then based on the seasons, you get what you get. It's essentially a live animal. Every barrel is different, even next to one another. So we put those two together to compound the flavor, for lack of a better phrase. And then we take our rye. The bottled rye is a finished rye. We take an unfinished version and balance it to taste. I like to attribute it a little bit to kind of like grandma's cooking. When you're like, "Grandma, how is this made?" She's like, "This way." And you're like, no, like measure. I told you this.
Yeah.
You're like, will you measure? She's like, "You go measure, get away."
Yeah.
My Polish grandmother would have told me that and then told me to leave the kitchen. But with this, I also parallel to an old fashioned. Why is bitters in an old fashioned? It adds balance, adds complexity, and rounds out the whole flavor profile. That's what the rye does for us. It's at about 10 to 12% of that rye, and it's done to taste. We then take all three whiskeys, put it in a new American oak barrel at a level 4 char for another year. The reason for the fourth barrel is that when you're talking about those three whiskeys together, they tend, without the fourth barrel, they'd be segregated. I like to kind of consider that guerrilla art. Essentially, that's what I call the bourbon. Because we separate our large grain and small grain, it's guerrilla art. It's still art and beautiful, but in the double barrel, we wanted to bring them together and let them all sing together. It's kind of your symphony. You can even lean in as the cognac Sazerac versus the rye Sazerac. Cognac Sazerac's symphony, the rye Sazerac, well, with modern rice now, is guerrilla art. Both beautiful in their own right. None's better or worse, but they have their place. And so with this one, we bring them all together. And at 100 proof, I always lean in on saying it holds up with light textured cocktails and then varying texture cocktails. So stirred and shaken.
Nice. You're right. Like this is.
So where I said the Dorito effect on the bourbon, I really feel like this one more so is true to form on that concept because of the dry spice that almost spikes at the end.
Yep.
And that moistens the palate. I used to call it the bartender's trick. So when we make cocktails, you have your top hat, right, of your oil, and then you have your jacket. The jacket isn't around the rim. It's below the mouth line and down because it still creates the bouquet.
Yep.
Since 85% of smells that you taste. But the best part is when you hold it like this and you finish it and you talk pedantically and very ostentatious, you realize, oh, I'm out of my drink. Let me have another one. So I'm just leaning on the Dorito effect from the recent article. But
oh, that's really nice. We're probably gonna have to do another pour of that. But all right, so then on to question two. Why no age statement on the bottles?
So as I said, age statements, as a lot of people tend to know, or some may not know, it was a marketing ploy. When you really talk about whiskey, there is this beauty between marketing and the romanticized side of what we talk about. And age statements were a thing to legitimize Canadian whiskey at a point where it wasn't really on a lull, but it was losing its high point for what they were trying to go for. And then they leaned in on numbers. We saw numbers. It worked so well that almost anyone that distills anything carries a number on it. Even in some of our things, you have an age statement. I would prefer us not to have it, but we do it. One of our most known carries a 10-year on it. I wish it didn't have the 10-year. I wish it'd just be our collaboration, because I think that is, sorry for if this is like a family thing, but that's sex in a bottle, unfortunately. I was wowed by it.
You talked a lot about us as Americans doing the number chasing, and you talked a little bit about it just previously about if you like it, drink it. It doesn't matter what the age statement is. And there's a lot of people out in the world that are just be like, "Ooh, this 23-year-old and it costs you like $900 is way better." And you're like, there's no difference. Like, honestly, but you drink what you like what you drink. But and again, not saying there's anything wrong with it, but age usually doesn't always mean it's better. So that, I guess
it really doesn't. I mean, granted, to the true fact of the matter, yes, age is important. But the problem is we've now created this whole preconceived notion that the older it is, the better it is, the higher the proof, the closer to the barrel, where we lean in on single barrels, cask strengths, bottle and bond. And that's fine if you actually like that. But if you're actually drinking it because you think, oh, this is what I'm supposed to drink, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. One of my favorite places, and I'm going to call them out, Compass Box, I love you. They did a blend with the lowest year being a 2-year, I believe, with a bunch of much older whiskey in between it, and called it a 2-year just to mess with people. That's genius. And it just showcases that age is, yes, important, but it doesn't mean the older it is, the better it is.
Well, that's on to question 3.
Yes, sir.
All right, so that would leave our straight rye.
Straight rye.
Excellent.
I really wish if I could get a bottle pop out of it. All right, so we're going on the rye. Now, with the rye, you're talking about a high rye, a touch of barley, but the biggest thing is the finish. The idea is, where was rye originally made? How was what was the prominent grain in American whiskey? East Coast rye whiskey was made it was rye was a very prominent ingredient.
Oh yeah.
And so I always talk about, before the whiskey revolution, rye was rye with a multitude of other grain and any other tertiary grain around. We took a modern mash, which would be dry and spicy, that we're used to. We then finished it in French oak from the Vosges region of France. We had to air dry it for 3 years. We did that mainly because we wanted to increase the surface area of the stave, just because French wood's great for wine storage. It gives just a little bit of flavor that you need to complexify, but we wanted more out of it. I lean in on all 3 of our whiskeys, because I say all 3 of our founders essentially had a larger voice in each expression. This one I lean more on our master blender, master distiller, Ryan Perry. But the idea was, the finish was to add more texture to it, not just be a dry spice bomb. I lean in more on the concept of before Whiskey Revolution, early 1700s rye. That's the flavor profile we were trying to go for. It wasn't just the dry spice bomb at over 100 proof, and this only sits at 92. It was essentially trying to tell a story through a modern mash, a modern technique. I mean, I guess you can call finishing a modern technique, maybe an overutilized technique currently, but a modern technique nonetheless. And we tried to get close to that idea of what the flavor was then. We might not have nailed it on the head, but we went for it, and we're still continuing to go for it, as anyone new does. Like I said, we play with our food, things will change. I think this is more indicative of a rye Sazerac, like we talked about earlier.
This is just, I mean, this on a glass on a summer day is like a porch sipping whiskey. Like this is just
That's exactly what I've been leaning on. This is a summer rye, and a lot of people are like, "What's a summer rye?" I'm like, "Well, take a sip and think about it."
Yeah, like this again. Like it doesn't have that. It's just really good. It doesn't have a lot of that burniness into it. It really is just. It's a nice just summer rye. Like this is damn good. Like this is just.
So, when I started with Heaven's Door about 3 years ago, I will admittedly say the first two I leaned in on were the double barrel and rye, because they stood out beyond what their categories were. Then when I really got into the bourbon, I started to realize the beauty of it and really where it laid. And that was kind of what tethered me to what we do. I kind of fell in love, and unfortunately to them, I'm here until they tell me I suck. So,
well, I mean, look, you have a damn good product, and again, you had me hooked when we talked in what was that, like a month ago? Like that was just
it was fairly recent.
Yeah,
from New York to now Tennessee.
And
back in essentially my home state.
No, this even kind of ties into our question 3, which is, again, you travel a lot. You're a former barman. What's the one thing that you look for when you're walking into a new bar, other than your product? But like, is there something that like when you go into a bar, you're like, is there something that you look for, being like, this is a damn good bar, or something along those lines?
So you really like shots and fires over here on that. I mean, I've had the pleasure of being at some very beautiful bars that we've all got to read about, bought the books for, and that's been amazing. I'll admittedly say, no offense to anyone else in New York, technically there's a homie at Gaslight in Brooklyn that I completely am in love with. So I'm going to first shout out, I love you, Will, you know it. But I got the pleasure in 2017 to work at Joaquin Simo's bar, pouring ribbons with Brooke Toscano. Before she became a partner, we were just a bunch of silly Texas kids trying to do a pop-up. It actually went off really well, and we did not think it would. We're like, no one knows who a bunch of dumb Texas guys are trying to do some silly ass shit, and it worked. It was beautiful. So dearest to my heart, pouring ribbons, I love them. However, when I walk into a bar, to actually answer your question, to not try to like be a politician on that, when I walk into a bar, I always look at what are your classics and what are your seasonals, or whatever you're trying to work on. What academic prowess does it come from? It's silly because as I was learning distillate, I was learning cocktails, and I leaned more at the infancy of learning the cocktail side a little more. So I leaned in on like, what's your technique? Why are you doing this? Kinetic energy, dilution, chill. What's the processes? Like, how are these things happening? Why are you doing that? That doesn't make sense. And now I've kind of come in and just been really excited to see how the bartender interacts with the guest, because at the beginning, you nerd out about all the literature you're supposed to read and all the things you're supposed to know. But we also kind of killed ourselves in that regard, because we learned those things and then we treated our guests like shit. We're like, oh, you don't know an old fashioned was originally in 1806 and in 1882 in Kentucky it was called old fashioned. Like, you're like, you just now like word vomiting on them, and they're like, man, I just really wanted to drink. So essentially, I've now leaned in on the idea of like, how do you interact with guests? And that is how I lean in on a good bar. I mean, one of my favorite bars is on the weekends, a speed bar, on the weekdays, a neighborhood spot, to the point where someone's house is literally next door to the establishment. On a Wednesday, a couple play Scrabble together. On a Monday, the older woman comes over, hangs out, has her wine, does a shot, gives the bartenders a high five, and walks away. And they're all interacting, having conversations. That is service. So I guess that's how I would lean it. That was a very pedantic way to explain that. But yes.
It's time for a second pour. I mean, I'm going to stick for the ride for question 4, but like that's just really damn good.
I'm gonna lean in on the one I wish I could have sent you.
Well, all right. So not even off of that, because I'm fucking amazing. But do you guys have any other plans? Again, not looking for a scoop or anything, but like, how did that come about? And do you plan on doing any more barrel shares? Like,
so the way this came about, I like to kind of call it beneficent error. It's kind of like you work hard and then sometimes luck comes in and somehow shit comes to fruition. Truly, this is kind of how that really came to be. Ryan Perry, or Master Blender, coming for where he came from, and really embodying the identity just as Mark Bushala and Bob Dylan do. Because the one thing I will lean into, we didn't talk about that. Yes, there is celebrity that is. Hi everyone, we have celebrities that do shit. But really, coming from a very rural area outside of Duluth, Minnesota, whiskey was a part of his life. I mean, yeah, he made his name in New York, and the man lives in California. But all three of our founders collaborate on and talk about everything that we create. Yes, he is a recluse, so he only talks to those two gentlemen. Trust me, the closest I got to him was 6 rows at Beacon Theater in New York. That's about as close as I've ever gotten to him. I'm actually seeing his son in Fort Worth, and we're actually going to hang out on the 22nd.
Awesome.
Which is weird because it really has no association. It just happened, again, beneficent error. It was just this idea of collaborating and trying to do something different. I really lean in on the idea of saying it's playing with your food. It's never perfect. For people that have ever been in architecture, you spend a semester working on a design. You present that design to not only your professor, your dean, and guest professors that show up from a litany of other schools, but they never tell you what you did well. They tell you what you did wrong. And it's a way to internally critique yourself. So that means you're always trying to do something. And that's kind of how this happened. We were kind of playing with our expressions. We wanted to understand this idea of the finishing processes, which we leaned on very hard in our bootleg. And this just kind of came about as like a thing. We didn't expect it to be anything wowing. We're like, oh, this could be good. I mean, these flavors seem to really, they'll pair very well. They'll almost be complements and complementary contrasts throughout the whole profile. And that's exactly what happened. It then became this weird thing where a lot of people fell in love with it. And it sold out way faster than we were thinking, because we were just like, oh yeah, this will be this random thing hopefully people get and they like we do. And it definitely turned into something that's no longer available. So yeah, that's why I like it.
On to question 4. So again, your bottle is tied to music somehow. What would be your closing song for, again, ending the shift at the bar? What is your closing song?
So one, I'm going to give an article a joke. There was an article that we talked about earlier, that paired whiskey with songs. They put a Bob Dylan song, not even with Heaven's Door. I thought that was ridiculous. Brooks, why would you do that? Anyways, thank you, appreciate it. The Houston people loved us for that because I watched that podcast for it. But my favorite closing song as a bartender, I had two. One was Close Your Tab, which was really beautiful because it was the most redundant song I've ever heard. And I was like, man, where is Guinness? Like, you got to hear this. There's got to be some record to this. The other one was Lily Allen's Fuck You. Mainly because it wasn't like I didn't like the guests, because I loved them. I appreciated them coming in. Are you kidding me? I'm a habitual child of like talking way beyond closing to a guest when we connect, but I always want to connect. But at close, I have everyone else behind me being like, "Yo, dude, stop talking to him. We gotta go." And I'm like, "Oh shit, I'm sorry." So that was more a marker for me to realize I had to stop being just word vomiting, overly pedantic to the guest. But I loved them because it worked on both ends.
Yep.
It was my red button and their red button.
Excellent. Okay.
But there's always a good closing song, right? I mean,
Yeah.
It's something you identify to. And if you do it enough, your guests kind of get it. They hear the beat before the lyric.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh,
time to go.
Thanks, I got to go. And you're like,
Yeah.
oh, man, no problem. Thanks for coming in. See you tomorrow. Have a good one. You want hugs? Let's do hugs.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, pre-COVID.
Yeah. Well, again, yeah. We open at 11 tomorrow. We'll see you tomorrow. But yeah.
I mean, it's the same thing that, like, when you ask that, you have to ask someone to leave. It's like, hey, unfortunately, tonight's not your night. Have a good night. You're more than welcome to come tomorrow. There's also other bars all over, but you're not welcome here. Have a good night. Thank you. Give them a hug. I'm like, see you tomorrow. Just how it goes.
Yeah.
You know?
5. Comes down to the Whiskey Wednesday coin. We can flip it. We can spin it. We can do whatever you want. But the question 5, should celebrities be in the spirits industry?
Fuck yeah. Why? I'll tell you why. So, yes, we can talk about all the celebrity brands, right? But in some, there's an ebb and flow, right? There is a viability to it. How do brands get launched? How does someone have a passion that actually can produce their product without a fund? Mainly for us, I mean, would you really call Bob Dylan a celebrity? I don't really think he sits in the celebrity category. I mean, truthfully, he's not running around everywhere doing all the things. He just really enjoyed something for about 50 years of his life. And that's kind of how, through beneficence and error, we came to be. And I say beneficence and error because it is a lot of work with a little bit of luck. And what we produced is, in my opinion, we played with our food enough, and we've made something really nice. And I just really don't think what we do it is a celebrity brand. How many celebrities have a Nobel Prize for literature? How many brands put a gate on a bottle that has actually been made, and then whatever it's been bought for goes back to private farmers?
Well, there we go. 5 drinks in, 5 drinks down, 5 questions answered.
Did we only do 2 hours? I feel like we didn't do enough.
Cheers to you, sir.
Cheers.
5 drinks down, 5 questions answered, not even close to midnight. Sir, if you're ever in New York again, come hang out.
First phone call when I come to New York. We're going to Brooklyn because we're going to do some weirdness, and then we're going to come back into Manhattan. I love you. Cheers, sir.
Cheers. Thank you so much.